The face is erased, the identity gone, eyes that see nothing. Now an object to be recorded and catalogued. The remains of men who would conquer the Arctic, achieve the very height of ambition, who were broken by an indifferent landscape and died in starvation and despair. Remains that now, a century later, tell the story of a doomed expedition, a mass death on a tiny Arctic island that many believe happened needlessly. It's not boats but planes that storm the Arctic now. Barry Ranford's a Brampton, Ontario teacher and amateur historian. Such as his obsession with the Franklin mystery, even a painful broken arm doesn't delay this trip.
Watch here, this is good here. Look at the water.
John Harrington is a colleague. Their destination is King William Island.
Dump the equipment off, and we'll finish the survey work.
This is it here.
No, this is it here, right here.
The Inuit call King William back of beyond. It's considered one of the coldest and most desolate places in the Arctic. This search party is one of two groups on the island. They're here during the few weeks of summer when temperatures reach a balmy 5 or 10 degrees. To spend a winter here without knowing how would be living hell. Yet some of Franklin's men lasted almost 4 years. This is Ranford's third trip to King William, following the trail of debris left behind by Franklin's men 150 years ago. He's finding evidence that tells a harrowing story of immense human suffering, forging a new version of a legend. And
3 skulls and remains of 4 men.
Yeah, it was towards the end of our 2 weeks.
Ranford has found the grave site of 4 of Franklin's men, remains that search parties spent 3 decades looking for. This may start a new chapter of the history.
What we're finding today, or what we are going to visit today, are men that were left behind, too weak to go on, physically and mentally. You know, they had just given up, and they said they probably want to wait for perhaps help that came from the north, which of course never came.
Ranford is slowly piecing together the story of Franklin's demise. But more than that, he's learning through his discoveries and those of other Canadians that the Victorian England version of Franklin's fate isn't entirely true.
Off to my right, in that direction, you can see another skull. It's maybe even farther, maybe 100, 200 feet away. I walked over there, and as I walked into this area, I then started picking up visually pieces of wood, a little piece of leather, and what appears to be a long bone, like a femur or a tibia, I believe. And then finally, looking at a mound, I saw the top part of a skull protruding from the ground, covered with moss. And then I realized that this was probably a grave. This is a lovely piece. I just hope it stays. And if you look very closely here, you'll see the material, the men's clothing. There it is there. Right. There it is there. Yeah, that's
blue uniform cloth.
Yeah, that's British broadcloth.
You bet.
Barry Ranford shares his discovery with another Franklin follower. David Woodman is searching King William Island for his own clues. He's convinced Franklin could have survived if he'd only adapted. Woodman's written a book compiling for the first time all the Inuit testimony about Franklin, testimony the British Navy rejected. Why would they not have paid attention to the Inuit testimony before, do you think?
In the Victorian England, they wanted the idea that they all marched together as a valiant band across desolate wastes and met a heroic end. And I can't say that they weren't heroic just because of the way they died, but I don't think that that's the way it happened. And if you don't want to hear what somebody's telling you and you don't really trust them anyway for whatever bias you have, it just gets shunted away.
The Admiralty and the British public refused to hear anything unheroic about Franklin. But exposed to the cold light of science, the stories don't hold up. These are bones Ranford found on an earlier expedition. They tell the story of scurvy and lead poisoning. They indicate how young some men must have been. There's the jawbone of a 9-year-old boy. The bones were shipped to the forensic labs of Hamilton's McMaster University for study by Anne Canelyside.
Well, it suggests to me that these individuals were being intentionally dismembered, perhaps for consumption. I think the evidence strongly suggests cannibalism. If I can show you a few examples, here we've got a rib fragment with 4 cut marks here, here, little one here, and there. Very distinct. We've also got them on some of the vertebrae. This is an atlas vertebra, the first vertebra in the neck, and there's a very distinct cut mark there.
Weak leadership, bad food, a failure to adapt. The new interpretation suggests folly more than glory. But if critics won't accept Franklin's men as heroes, they do recognize their suffering. Franklin's story is that of immense human tragedy and desperate attempts to survive. What it tells of the human condition is what fascinates these people today.
It's amazingly, you cannot understand what it's like here until you come here. All the armchair historians in the world have no conception of what it's really like, how desolate and hard it is.
It's really a frightful place to die. And you can tell how you can imagine, with anybody with any kind of imagination, you can see how you have been away from your home that long and your loved ones, and to come to a place like this and know you still got 4,000 miles to get home, and of the first 1,000 is going to be the worst. They would give up.
As the seasons passed into years, one can only imagine what they did to survive. They tried to walk to the mainland and died where they dropped, their lips black and their teeth loose from scurvy, their useless leather boots slipping on the frozen moss and glassy shale. They had dreamed of sailing all the way to the ports of China on an open polar sea. They died in the worst state of human degradation. At least some men would have discovered their ships had stopped only a few miles away from the elusive Northwest Passage, a waterway never used by Britain even after it was charted. Barry Ranford believes despair is what ultimately killed them.
I think perhaps the psychological effect of what happened up here to his men, the elements that they had to deal with, the time length that they were here, had far more to do with their demise than lead poisoning or even scurvy, although we know scurvy probably did most of them in. But it was the mental attitude changed. So what I try to find, what I do when I come here is I try to put myself in Franklin's men's position. I walk the tundra alone. When I'm on the site, I try to think, what were their thoughts at that time? You have to think of the mind, the man. Each one of them is a different personality with his own problems. And it could be that he's never seen his new child who's just been born, or he doesn't know whether his mother is dead, or what's happened to his wife. All those things you have to think about.
The intrepid search over King William Island continues. They may never find the big ticket items like the ships or Franklin's grave, but perhaps enough to tell more of the story.
Wow, look at this, eh? Isn't that amazing? This angle here should be at that angle there.
No, I think it's like this. I think there's the boat.
I don't.
There's the brace.
But if you look at that one down there, it's straight. That's been bent like that.
Is there an answer to it all?
I don't think so. I hope not. I don't want there to be a final answer. I don't think there should be a final answer. I once heard somebody say, I wonder what it would have been like if one man had gotten back alive. It's round. How it would have changed the entire story. One man had survived. It's a very interesting question to pose.
Rivets on the corner.
We'll never find it all.
It has rivets along the top. Look at the rivets.
Yeah, that's the same pattern that you see down at the Schwatka site.
The facts reveal human folly on a monumental scale. Ships that disappear without a trace, ominous warnings not heeded, mass death. A new interpretation denies the glory but mourns the tragedy. As the legend is revisited, Franklin lives. For Primetime News, I'm Carol Off.